Hello, listeners. Before we start, I just want to remind you, you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
In the summer of 1975, something strange was happening in the skies above Canada. From coast to coast, hundreds of people reported witnessing glowing lights, structured craft, and bizarre aerial phenomena. Some of the sightings even left scorched earth and physical traces behind. There were so many incidents that summer that the National Research Council and RCMP documented thousands of pages of eyewitness accounts. Reports coming from everyday citizens, RCMP officers, air traffic controllers, and even military personnel. The skies were so busy that year that it's become known as Canada's Summer of UFOs. In this episode, we're going to dive into the details of that incredible summer with one of Canada's leading UFO researchers, Chris Rutkowski. For decades, Chris has collected and analyzed thousands of UFO reports and maintains the country's and one of the world's most comprehensive UFO report databases. Together, Chris and I will explore what happened, what was reported, and what, if anything, can be concluded from one of the most active periods of UFO activity ever recorded in Canada. So let's get into it. In this episode of Nighttime, Chris Rutkowski and I will revisit the year 1975 and Canada's summer of UFOs. Mr. Chris Rutkowski, it's been a while since I touched base with the UFO scene in Canada. What better way to do it than connect with you? Just tell me right off the jump here, what's new with UFOs in Canada?
Oh, man. Well, there's a fair amount of stuff that's new. I mean, there have been some UFO sightings that have been going on, but there was an interesting ball lightning case I think we're going to talk about in a little while.
Heck yeah.
The Sky Canada project report is finally coming out. We're looking more historical, too, to put it all into context. I mean, 1975 was quite interesting, and here we are in 2025, a 50-year anniversary of a big wave, and things are happening.
Yeah, I never even thought about the anniversary, because we're going to be, as we get going here, we're going to be talking about what's referred to as Canada's Summer of UFOs, which happened in 1975. You're a great person to hear that story from. For people who are unfamiliar with you or your work, let's tell them why you're someone we should listen to talk about the summer of UFOs back in 1975. What's your background?
Well, my background is I started investigating UFO cases back in 1975, so I'm really, really old. And I got a background in a Bachelor of Science in Education and a master's degree. And I have, been into the UFO scene. I've written 10 books or 11 books. Another one's coming out in a little while. I've traveled from coast to coast, investigating and talking with people and trying to understand what it is that people have been seeing over the years here in Canada and advancing knowledge, like advancing Canadian cases to the world, presenting them in a number of forums, on TV shows and a number of magazines and articles and books. It's something that really, we should be paying a little more attention to. And Canada's had some really interesting cases, and I think that we should present these to the world a little bit more.
Yeah, and you have been presenting them to the world in a variety of ways through books, as you mentioned, in documentaries. You also, you're the editor of the Canadian UFO Survey, which is the annual report that outlines all of the Canadian UFO sightings that have been reported to a variety of sources, and you analyze the data, looking at trends and all this stuff. Regular listeners will be well familiar with that because I try to cover it each year when you release the report. Before we jump into today's topic, though, I want to ask you about a news story you already referenced at the beginning of this episode. Since I've got into the UFO phenomenon, something I've heard mentioned often is this concept of ball lightning. I understood it to be almost like a theoretical type of electrical weather event, but It's and I've seen it referenced in a lot of possible explanations for UFO sightings, specifically the Bell Island boom, which has happened in Newfoundland, something I covered on the show. One of the explanations for that was that it was a ball lightning, which is a rare type of weather event, as I mentioned. It seems like, I don't know if it's for the first time, but at least for one of the first times, a ball lightning event was captured on video by a Canadian. It was in the news. I'm going to play you a short news clip from Global News, and then we can talk a bit about this, and if, as a UFO investigator or researcher like yourself, this is an important story. Here comes the story of the ball lightning that was filmed just earlier this month.
What is it? It's going for a long time.
A ball of light hovers over a field.
Looks like a fireball, but not really. It's the wrong color.
And this couple from Rich Valley, Alberta, was mesmerized.
After a rather vicious lightning strike, we saw the ball of fire kind of retain, 20 feet above the ground.
The cell phone video was captured an hour northwest of Edmonton by Ed and Melinda Party. It shows the ball of light for about 20 seconds before it disintegrates. They were under a tornado watch and experiencing a thunderstorm Wednesday evening when they saw this about a kilometer away from their home.
Yeah, it was moving horizontally above the ground. Incredibly bright, too.
It was very bright.
It was really bright.
Off in the distance, they see something glowing there.
But what exactly is it? According to one scientist, it could be ball lightning or a form of it.
Sometimes you can get that plasma itself or region of plasma to just linger for a little while. And sometimes that plasma itself, if it's in a ball shape, they call it ball lightning.
It's a rare phenomenon that can be produced from intense lightning. But why it's caused is still something scientists are trying to determine.
What are the right conditions to actually make this phenomenon happen? We don't know, because again, it's such a really rare event and it's not very well understood.
Florian believes that although this weather event is rare, we could see more of it.
The more and more severe storms that we're getting across the prairies, there might be greater chances of other people witnessing these phenomena as well.
The parties say they're lucky to experience an extraordinary event not many people have.
I was glad it was far away from our house, though, because I don't think I'd want to get near that because that's a lot of power in there.
It looks like your typical UFO sighting. It's an incredibly bright ball of light that's clearly hovering just above the ground. The video we see in that news clip, it's shot in the middle of the day, so there's full sun, which shows how incredibly bright this ball lightning is. And then after 20, 25 seconds or whatever it was, you see the thing just sizzle away, almost leaving behind it almost like a cloud of sparks as it dissipates into the sky. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
I have never been lucky enough to see ball lightning. I've seen a plasma discharge. Some of your listeners may have seen a discharge. This was also during a thunderstorm, and there was a tremendous flash of light, and there suddenly appeared a blue ball of light zipping along the hydro lines above me, and they traveled quite a good distance. This little ball, or big ball, actually must have been about a foot in size. And that's the same principle in a lot of ways. Scientists are unsure of exactly what drives ball lightning. They know it exists. Although there still are some naysayers, believe it or not, some scientists who say there's no such thing. It's just something else, and people are misidentifying something. But skeptics and debunkers like Phil Klass and Don Menzel, they both used ball lightning to explain a lot of UFOs. The trouble is it's so rare that you can't possibly equate them with UFOs. And yet these people were amazingly fortunate. This is one of the clearest and best videos of ball lightning ever taken. And it happened here in Canada. We're lucky.
Very cool. And I don't think there's any doubt left whether or not this exists. But like I said when I introduced it, is I've always thought of it as this kind of theoretical, unproven idea that's so incredibly rare. But this video that's shown in the news here, it's clear as day. And if I saw that, I would have no idea what it was, and I would probably report it to you as a UFO. And I think most people would think paranormal, supernatural, UFO, if you just seen an incredibly bright ball of light appear and hover for 20 seconds. It's remarkable that the world has these kinds of mysteries that just every so often will pop up. Cool story.
Mm-hmm. Technically, it is a UFO, unidentified flying object.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Or the other term that is often thrown around, unidentified aerial phenomena. This is certainly some kind of unidentified aerial phenomena. But
Hmm.
let's get into our topic. The reason we're here is to travel back in time to 1975, a time referred to as Canada's Summer of UFOs. The best way to introduce this, I think, is with the concept of a UFO flap. For someone new to this, how would you describe like a UFO flap and what that means in terms of UFO sightings?
Well, there's two terms, a UFO flap and a UFO wave. A flap is something that occurs in a small isolated area. So if suddenly everybody in Prince Edward Island started seeing UFOs, that's a very relatively small area. It just means a proliferation of sightings. A wave is sort of an extended flap that occurs over a period of months across a larger period. So in 1975, in terms of numbers, there were a lot more UFO sightings reported in 1975 than other years. And periodically we'll get these waves. And we're not sure what causes them. Some people have tried to associate waves with, I don't know, the distance to Mars, weather at the time, political unrest, all this sort of stuff. But nobody's been able to pin down exactly what leads to waves. But, these things do occur from time to time. And there's usually, but not always, confined to one continent. Some, appear throughout the world at the same time. And it's the type of thing that sort of makes us try and understand why is it that we have all these cases all at once.
Mm-hmm. Other than this wave that we're going to be discussing that happened in Canada during the summer of 75, has there been any other major like UFO flaps or waves in Canada?
Yeah, we've had quite a few. Worldwide, there was quite a significant wave in 1952, and that's the Project Blue Book. The U.S. Air Force identified that as being very peak, and it happened in Canada as well. That was 52 was a significant number. 67 to 69, a lot of cases right across the country. 75 was a classic wave right across Canada, and then we can get into there's one in 83. And 84, and then we have to get into the 90s, 95, 2004, 2008, 2012 have been significant. In fact, 2012 one of the greatest peaks in Canadian ufology on record. So, there are these ups and downs of numbers of UFO reports, and why they happen, we still don't know.
But before we get into 75, does that seem to be one of the more intense UFO flaps or UFO waves, or is what makes the summer of 75 so unique that so much happened just within the summer months? Like, what makes 75 so special?
Yeah, well, 75, 76 both had a lot of UFO cases. The National Research Council non-meteoric file has more cases in that area than surrounding years. I personally received, 150, something like that, cases just from Manitoba alone. And then, of course, there's the rest of Canada as well that were reporting them, not necessarily to the NRC. So we did get a lot of cases in a very short period of time. There was a flap embedded in the wave, I suppose, but for some reason it was summer 75, summer 76, and a lot of people were seeing things.
Now, you shared with me before we started here, and you posted an article on your website or on your Substack that compiles a list of documents related to the UFO sightings during the summer of 75. We're going to go through and break a lot of these down, but I got to ask you, where did all this stuff come from? Because when I'm looking through the reports you sent me, it seems to be mostly like the RCMP reporting something to like the astrology section of the National Research Center. Like, all this seems like it should all be top secret stuff. What is this, and where did it come from?
Well, the National Research Council of Canada did, in fact, investigate UFO reports, and with the idea that perhaps some of these cases might lead to the discovery of meteorites on the ground. So they're asking people for reporting lights in the sky, and the idea that some of them were meteors, and a lot were not meteors. That's why they're the non-meteoric sightings. Most of those were unexplained, and most of them were actually uninvestigated by the NRC. If they didn't sound like they could be meteors, then they ignored them completely. And that's why there's some interesting cases, such as people seeing objects like two bowls rim to rim moving around in the sky. Obviously not meteors, but possibly something else. The rest of the cases came from my personal files, ufology research. The problem is that not a lot of that is scanned in, whereas the National Research Council of Canada non-meteoric files, a lot of those have been made available as digital copies. In fact, I was in Ottawa at the National Archives looking through the NRC files earlier this year, and I personally scanned in 500 or 600 cases that had not been digitally available for, and I'm slowly making those available too. So, these are official records that people made to the RCMP, to National Defense, to, air traffic control. These are bona fide UFO reports, and we have some documentation that shows that the government of Canada was taking, at least a modicum of interest in them.
Mm-hmm. I think people will be surprised to hear how many times, as we go through these reports, how many times we hear of an RCMP officer witnessing it, or an air traffic controller, or in one case, there's like a government radar operators, or a radar operator who saw stuff. So it's going to get interesting. But before we get into the reports, let's take a quick break. And when we get back, we'll go through UFO reports from the summer of 75, and we'll start on the 10th of April in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan. We'll start after a quick break. I know there's UFO sightings from 1975 prior to the summer, but for the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to start on the 10th of April. A UFO sighting reported from Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan. I'll read it to you here. It's reported to the National Research Council Meteor Center in Ottawa. So I'm going to read it just verbatim, and you'll have to translate some of this to me.
Okay.
The following telex was received from Hudson Bay Detachment. At 10 p.m., on the 10th of April, 75, this office received a telephone call from Barry Kosei of Hudson Bay that he and two other persons, and they named them Mr. and Mrs. Wizenak, also of Hudson Bay, were observing a UFO approximately 1 mile west of Hudson Bay and a half-mile north in the sky. The report was that lights were flying around in the sky. A member who took the call stepped outside and observed the same lighted object in the sky in the area, as described by the initial witness. It was also observed by another person through binoculars at the office and described as being elliptical in shape with lights surrounding it, and it seemed to revolve and then disappear towards the north. The matter's being investigated according to the ops manual, and a report will be submitted. It now appears that the National News Service has picked this up, and inquiries are being received here, and indications are that a news team may be arriving. In view of this, information is being forwarded for your information, and we're attempting to keep this low-key due to the involvement of our member. This sighting took place over a period of approximately 1 hour.
Yeah.
What do you make of this?
Well, I mean, first of all, RCMP officer was one of the witnesses. So this is a multiple witness case with an RCMP officer. And
two RCMP officers. One walks outside and sees it, and then another one seems to come outside with binoculars.
Yeah. So, this is a fairly well-observed thing. And although it says the lights were moving around, they had to use binoculars, and they were watching it for about an hour. And if I'm not mistaken, there's a little annotation in pen or pencil on this.
Yeah, written at the bottom of it in handwriting, it says, could be Venus or perhaps Saturn.
Mm-hmm. And actually, you can plug it into a star chart program. And sure enough, Venus and Saturn were both in the southwest, and they would have been moving, towards the north over the period of the time that this was being watched. Whenever you have a sighting that's seen over an extended period of time, like an hour is a long time to be watching a light in the sky.
Heck yeah.
And because there were some bright objects in the sky, that might be a clue that perhaps this did have an explanation. It started the frenzy and all the interest in UFOs during the great summer of 1975. I mean, I mentioned that there had been a few other cases before, but Hudson Bay seems to be one of the most prominent in the National Research Council files. And Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, by the way, is quite a bit north. It's north of Regina, north of Saskatoon. In fact, it is not much else in that particular area. So it's fairly isolated. Would be fairly flat. So you have a good view of everything. And yet they had time to call the RCMP. to take a look at it, and everybody saw it. So there's no question something was definitely there. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't a hoax. Something was seen in the sky, and it was definitely recorded. And they had some concern that the media were going to find out about it, especially since RCMP were involved. We don't want the media to hear about this sort of thing. Our members aren't drinking and all this sort of stuff. You just 75. You can just imagine what was going on, and yet people started, after that point, to see more and more UFOs across Canada. And perhaps, I have to say, maybe the media attention from this particular case in Hudson Bay, Saskatchewan, led to more people in Canada looking up. Something was seen in Saskatchewan. Maybe I'll look up, might see something myself.
Possibly. And I'm sure you see that when there's major UFO news in the news, there's going to be probably a bump or an increase in reports. In this case, if this event that we just discussed in Hudson Bay was actually covered by the news, that may encourage some people to come out of the woodwork. Yeah. But that said, the next sighting we're going to talk about, the news wouldn't have had time to discuss what happened in Hudson Bay, because that same night in Carman, Manitoba, there was another UFO sighting. And this one, I think, will go on to have some extra importance, because it's the first report being attributed to a series of UFO events referred to as Charlie Red Star. I'm going to read you the report, and then you can tell me what you think about this and what the heck Charlie Red Star is.
Sure.
So this was also received by the National Research Council. It says, "Attention Meteor Center. A UFO was sighted near Carman, Manitoba by Mr. Robert Dimart of Carman at 9:35 p.m. Mr. Dimart was at his airfield, which is referred to as the Friendship Field, when the UFO was sighted. Dimart's wife also observed the UFO. It was seen flying in a northwesterly direction at approximate altitude of 300 feet. It was 50 feet in length, flying too slow to be an aircraft. The color was all red and was pulsating. No other lights other than the red one were visible, and no sound seemed to be emanating from the UFO. Mr. Dimart is a well-known aviation expert in the area." The weather was, and then it goes on to say that the weather and the skies were clear at the time. Mm-hmm. So this one seems to be a UFO sighting coming from another credible person. They go on to even make a point in the report to say that he's a well-known aviation expert, reporting it from an airfield.
Yeah. Well, Bob and Elaine Dimart were very well known in the Carman community. He did have his own airfield, Friendship Field. And Carman's sort of an isolated, not an isolated area, but it's a rural area. So there wasn't really an airport as such, but for crop dusting and for surveys and that type of thing, he had a number of planes there. In fact, I think he actually built some of the planes himself. And this obviously was not, Jupiter or Venus. This is a different type of object. And although there had been some 2 weeks earlier, there had been a bright light seen in the Carman area near Gravesville. That probably really did start the whole thing. This seemed to have really coalesced. There was obviously 2 sightings the same night that were reported to the National Research Council, which would have been very significant at the time, from Hudson Bay and Carman. And this, was an object that was moving over the airstrip. I talked with Bob and Elaine Dimart a number of times. I was out there. And there's no question that this was something very different. They had a good handle on what was flying in the sky. He knew most of the pilots in the area. This was obviously an aerial object, and they had no idea what this thing was. And their little airstrip and their farm really became a focus for the whole Carman UFO situation as it developed over the next number of months. And the reason it's called Charlie Red Star is, number one, it's red. Number two, it was seen so often that, especially from the Dimart's airfield, in fact, every night for several months, seen so often that they would just say, "Oh yeah, there's Charlie again." They used to, so that's how the name came. They called it Charlie Red Star, and it took on a folk tradition. Charlie was the folk hero of the Carman area.
Okay, so as we get going here through the summer '75, we're going to hear more red light reports from the Carman, Manitoba area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, and I've heard the term Charlie Red Star. I've never got like dove into what that actually is or what these reports are, so I'll learn about that tonight. But so far, we're going to be talking about the summer of '75. We're still we're two sightings in, but we're still only on our first day, April 10th of '75. So let's move a bit forward, a little over a week. April 18th, 75 in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. This is an interesting one because it seems to be a UFO that got scared away by a jet.
Yeah.
So this report's interesting because it starts by listing the observers, and it's 5 RCMP officers.
Five, not just one, five.
5 of them.
Yeah.
Between the town of Tuxford and Marquis, Saskatchewan. A high-intensity white light, no discernible shape, with altitude wavering from below cloud level to just above cloud level. A single object observed to move from west of Moose Jaw to approximately 30 miles northwest of Moose Jaw during the time of sighting. The sighting spanned a period of roughly 2 hours. And then it goes on to list a bit of what they've done. They checked with the Regina Air Traffic Controller, which showed no radar contact with the object. The UFO was observed until an Air Canada flight from Regina to Edmonton reached the approximate location of the object, at which time it disappeared. The aircraft's lights and the UFO were observed in the same general area immediately prior to the disappearance.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like they see this thing when the Air Canada jet gets near it, it takes off.
Yeah. Again, this is they saw it over 2 hours. Now, okay, you have all these RCMP officers. They're looking at this light in the sky. One would think that and assume that RCMP officers are well-trained observers, and they would know the difference between, let's say, Venus and something else. It's a little suspicious that this was a 2-hour observation of an object in the west heading into the north, and the fact that it was disappeared occasionally. One could say clouds or something like that, but if we go strictly by what the RCMP officers were putting in their logbooks and making their official report, they were watching something very unusual, by definition, a UFO then and a UAP now. So, and again, this is all within a very short period of time. So the summer of UFOs is really building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we go through these reports, we're just reading the reports. So there's so much that we don't know about what led up to this sighting. So we'll have to do our best to fill in the blanks. But just looking at what's noted in the report, and your expert analysis of it, I think it's showing that this has been quite the summer.
And the other thing is, we have to understand these are official government reports. We don't have government reports anymore from, the U.S. Air Force or the Canadian Air Force necessarily, but we have government reports now. We haven't had an RCMP report coming public for quite some time. And so, it shows that there is a serious interest and a serious effort to take some time to record and try and understand what people were seeing.
Well, let's move on a couple of weeks. Let's go to June 4th of '75, and we're not going to be too far from you. We're going to Lake Winnipeg in Manitoba. This sighting I'll call the hazy light bulb. Mm-hmm. This is a statement by Miss Mary Klatt. Looks like it's signed, the statement's signed by her, and it has 2 witnesses to the statement, both RCMP officers. So here's what she says. On June 4th of 1975, just after midnight in Beconia, Manitoba, my husband came running into the house and told me to come out and look at a light in the sky. I ran out, and it was directly in front of the house, right over the lake. It looked like a large inverted light bulb. It seemed to be spinning like a top. There wasn't any noise from it. The light was a yellowish white, and it was going from south to north. I would say it wasn't as high as a plane would be. We watched it for about 10 minutes, and then we called you, the police. It seemed to hover for a while and then disappear off to the north. We lost sight of it due to the trees. It seemed to disappear over the horizon. I've never seen anything like this before. It was over a mile out west from us and seemed maybe to be following the lake, and it traveled very quickly. And it did seem to have a sort of haze around it. So I'm trying to picture what an inverted light bulb would be.
Yeah, I guess so. The big part is at the bottom, and the screw part is at the top, or something like that.
Yeah, but light bulbs can go both ways, like whether it's a lamp or
true.
So it's like you can't really. I would never describe something as an inverted light bulb.
Yeah, interesting report. Now, put this into some context. Beconia is a small town on the east side of Lake Winnipeg. So as they were looking towards the west, this object was moving towards the north over the lake, so over water. And it was seen over a relatively short period of time, but long enough to get a good look at it. So 15 minutes is not too bad. Doesn't sound like it was a star or a planet. One could say maybe plane or something like that. The fact that this didn't have all those types of running lights and whatever, this was obviously something else. As a side note, Beconia is the location of a nude beach in Manitoba. But may be completely unrelated to this case, of course. It was something that was definitely observed.
Okay, I like it though. I just like, my favorite part of the whole sighting is the inverted light bulb,
and that actually that's typical. People often are at a loss for words to describe some of what they've seen, because this is so far out of their experience. Like, how would you describe this type of thing?
Before we get to the next Charlie Red Star, let's go to July 2nd in Cumberland, Prince Edward Island. This is a report by a Mr. Ray Timmons to the RCMP. And we're receiving this as it was sent to the National Research Council Meteor Center, like all the others seem to be. So on July 2nd, 1975, just at about midnight, the skies were clear. There were 5 observers noted on the report here. The gentleman himself, Raymond Timmons, his wife, Beverly Timmons, and 3 of their children also seen this. Here's what they say. They saw a series of red and green lights. The red light went from bright to dim. There seemed to be no shape. They believed the altitude to be somewhere between 0 and 150 feet, and it moved in split-second movements. So like a quick jump, it would stop, then a quick jump. And it moved from right to left, and then left to right, and then back up and down, and then moved up and down several times. It hovered for approximately 5 minutes, and they believed it to be just one object. The duration of the sighting, approximately 15 minutes. So this, to me, like, it sounds like what they're describing is like a firefly or something.
Yeah, I mean, the red and green is very typical of, planes, of course, but red and green, and the fact that things are going up and down and side to side, it's very typical of what we hear stars and planets described. If you're looking at it and your eye is actually involuntarily moving, it makes the stationary light move around. But this was seen, over a fairly short period of time, 15 minutes, and stars, and planets would have been around a lot longer. Not sure what this was, but again, a number of witnesses. And the fact that it's in Prince Edward Island, and we've had Saskatchewan, then Manitoba, Prince Edward Island, it shows the national nature of the summer of 1975, that a lot of people were seeing things from right across Canada.
I also think it's impressive one difference between then and now with UFO sightings is these are all sightings that we're seeing reported to the RCMP. Nowadays, if you were to do something like this, a lot of these reports would be sent to different UFO groups and such. This is just stuff that actually made it to an RCMP officer who did an interview or took a statement or whatever, and took the next step to report it to like the Canadian Science Agency, the National Research Center. So these are kind of like the cream of the crop in that regard. Like they floated their way up.
Absolutely. And the reason the RCMP were investigating, because they were doing it on behalf of the National Research Council, which was based in Ottawa, but needed people all across Canada to report things to them. So they had the RCMP detachments right across Canada, and they had directives to investigate on their behalf.
Cool.
The Sky Canada project, which is the Canadian government study on how UFOs have been handled and managed over the various decades, they're making recommendations on how things should move forward. And of course, they're going to be making recommendations that there should be offices or people in government across Canada to accept reports so that, things are not lost and fall between cracks.
I mentioned before we got into that sighting in PEI that we're going to get to another Charlie Red Star sighting. We'll take our final break. When we get back, we'll jump to July 4th. We'll head back to Manitoba. We'll hear about Charlie Red Star again right after this. So the next report we have, July 4th of 75. This is from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I believe this to be the next in the series of Charlie Red Star sightings. I'll read this one to you here. This is a bit lengthy, but there's a lot of detail in this. This is a reported sighting of a UFO by someone named Oliver Mulhall. So it goes on to say that Oliver saw 3 large objects flying across the sky in a straight line from southeast to southwest on July 4th and 5th from his residence. The first sighting was at approximately 10:30 p.m., and the objects were visible for approximately 1.5 hours. The center of the object had approximately 20 to 30 smaller objects forming a complete circle around it of white lights. This center object ranged in color in sequences that seem untimed, from light blue to orange to red. The smaller lights would occasionally come to the center light, and its light would diminish somewhat, and then the smaller objects return to their original formation, and the large central object would regain its brilliance. The first and third lights would blink as if sending some kind of message, but remained white in color. These objects were also seen by Mulhall's wife Sylvia on Saturday, the 5th of July. These objects or lights appeared again traveling in the same direction, however appeared to be traveling faster than the previous night, and only remained visible for approximately 30 minutes. Mulhall states that he is not a drinker and has 6 years of experience in the British Army Infantry. He further stated he didn't report the same earlier event for fear of being ridiculed and for being taken as a crank, however changed his mind when he saw a recent article in a newspaper requesting reports of the same. So I guess that gets to what we said earlier, is a UFO report in the news may encourage others to come out of the woodwork.
Right. And we see that actually now too, that there's a lot of interest in the subject of UAP in the United States, various videos coming out, congressional hearings, and that doesn't generate new UFO reports. It generates old UFO reports reported very newly. You make sense there. You know what I mean? That, we're hearing from people who finally feel that, I saw something, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I feel a little more braver to come forward to report things because people are talking about it. That's what's happening with the media effect. Now, this particular case, 2 witnesses seen over a couple of nights, again, reported to the National Research Council. And have this little caveat, he wasn't drinking. He was a military guy. He knows what he's talking about. And this shows the quality and the level of competence of observers that, RCMP, military, people who have a good reputation for being good observers. So you don't dismiss these things out of hand necessarily. Maybe there's explanations, but you don't dismiss them out of hand because they know what they're seeing.
Yeah. This has been referred to as a Charlie Red Star sighting, but it's not a red star. I guess it did have some red.
Yeah, red-ish, from time to time.
All right. And one other thing about this, he was worried about reporting it for fear of being labeled a crank. But my thought is, what makes it sound like a crank, phony kind of report is, why did they feel the need to put in the report that the lights were blinking, like the outer lights were blinking as if they were sending some kind of message? How does a light blink to indicate that it's sending a message? That's the part I don't get. It seems like they're adding a little bit to it.
Yeah, and we have some early indications here of contactee, people who believe that they were contacted or selected by the UFOs or UAP or aliens for whatever reason. We saw a lot of that in the 1950s and into the 60s. In the 70s, we didn't get as much. And it took until, 80s, 90s when we had the abduction phenomenon, and sort of today when we have contactees who believe that the aliens are definitely here on Earth, and, they're communicating with us for whatever reason, and you can signal to them and play certain tones and things like that to bring them down. So, that contactee element wasn't as strong in the 1970s, but you have sort of a whiff of it in this particular case.
Mm-hmm. But I did enjoy the description, though, this idea that there was a bright center light with a whole bunch of smaller lights around it, and they all seem to be interacting. It just seems like a very technical kind of description. But again, if someone came to me and told me about this, I'd be like, wow, that's amazing. But then when they add it, and it seemed to be communicating with itself through blinking, I'd be like, oh, okay, one of these kinds of things.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one. Let's go to Mount Pleasant, Ontario, the 6th of July, 1975. This is an interesting one because it's going to be a case that leaves behind some physical evidence. It involves a farmer named Joe Borda who saw a silver dome-shaped object on his tobacco field. Here's the report from the RCMP. On July 6th, at approximately 4:30 to 5 p.m., tobacco farmer Joe Borda observed a silver, dome-shaped UFO on his field of tobacco plants in Mount Pleasant, Ontario. The object was approximately 400 yards away from where he was standing, and Borda assumed it was just his neighbor's stainless steel irrigation truck or tank. It was later reported that none of the neighbors had their work vehicles out that day. On July 8th, while examining the field, Borda found a depression about 20 to 30 feet in diameter of damaged tobacco plants at the spot where the object was seen. Some of the leaves from the plants within the depression were burnt. Other plants were flattened, and some were found broken at the stem.
Mm-hmm.
So this sounds an awful lot like a UFO landed on the field and left a sort of like rudimentary crop, not circle, I guess like crop oval.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was certainly a precursor to the old crop circles. There's some interesting sidelines here, not reported in that, but there was an attempt by some UFO investigators at the time to try and get the plants analyzed because they figured, something was done to them, radiation, heat, something. And so they submitted them to the government to try and get somebody to analyze them. And the plants went missing, of course. So, all of a sudden we were back into we're starting to have some conspiracies involved here. But it's not a red one. This was a silver thing, and not just a physical object that he had seen leaving behind a trace. This was one of the physical traces left by UFOs that we often hear about. We don't hear about them anymore. These seem to be almost missing from UFO literature now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just kind of a shame that we have this report itself. But if this went to the RCMP and the National Research Council, it would be great if we had their follow-up, like if they actually went and examined anything, or if they just if they're looking for meteor debris. This seems like, of all the ones we've heard, this is the one I'd want to go check if it actually damaged the ground.
Yeah, and we don't have any of those analyses in the documentation at all. So what happened, we're not sure, but it was 50 years ago.
That's a good point. Let's jump forward to the 21st of July, 1975. We're going to be in Calgary, Alberta. And of all of them, this may be my favorite sighting because it involves the witness, a former Royal Canadian Air Force and DEW line officer reporting a UFO to RCMP. I didn't know what a DEW line officer was before this. I did a bit of research. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to take anyone who reports a UFO seriously, this would be the kind of person. A DEW line operator, often called a radiation, is a technician responsible for the maintenance and operation of the radar and electronic systems on the DEW line, which stands for the Distant Early Warning Line. Mm-hmm. These individuals work in isolated radar stations across the Arctic, ensuring the continuous functioning of the system that's designed to detect potential aerial threats to North America. So this is a report from someone who's basically like in a radar station with the sole job of using all the equipment to spot things coming to North America from far away. So I don't think you could have someone that's more qualified.
Right. And DEW line people, there were two DEW lines actually. One was a little bit south of that across the northern part of the provinces, but there were the second one in the higher Arctic. There were, dozens of stations all across. And we do have a number of DEW line reports from operators who had, seen and detected some UFOs, and they reported them. We have records of those. The idea was, of course, for them to keep an eye out
for spies and stuff.
Well, this was Cold War-ish, so it was Russian missiles coming over the pole and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. But that just gives a sense of this report's coming from the person who would report to the government, missiles are on their way here, or there's a spy plane, or God forbid, there's a bunch of aliens that are flying towards us in UFOs.
Yeah.
This would probably be one of the first people to see it. So let me read what he reported to the RCMP. On the 21st of July, 75, in Calgary, Alberta, Mr. Don Cooper reported to our office that he had observed two UFOs from his residence prior to 4:30 a.m. He made notes on the sighting, giving a complete description of everything that took place. At the end of the notes, he gave his complete qualifications in regards to sky observation. Copies of these notes are attached. The originals are being retained at the Calgary department. So we don't get what he saw, other than in the middle of the night from his home, he saw something, and it seemed like when he saw it, rather than in 2025, you'd pull out your phone, what he did was pulled out a pen and paper and just wrote down everything that he was witnessing and submitted that.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, there's a renewed interest in 2025 to put more Canadian military presence and radar installations in the north. And as a result of, people down south across the border, being concerned about security and national security and Canadian sovereignty. So interesting, even though the dew line itself was decommissioned in the 70s, there's a renewed interest. Here we are 50 years later to try and get more of an established presence in the north again.
We're getting deep into the summer, so let's keep going. Let's go to Lake Toyko in Ontario. We're going to go there for July 26th. 2 witnesses report an orange object bright enough to illuminate the lake. I'll read you a bit here. A large, bright object moving 225 degrees stopped and moved off on a heading of 135 degrees, approximately 15 degrees above the horizon. It gave off light bright enough to light up the lake. Noise like thunder was also heard, but the location was near railway tracks, and observers stated the noise very well could have been a train.
But I like the fact that it lit everything up, though.
Yeah.
I mean, that suggests that, again, this was something that was illuminating. It had its own power source, and it was flying around over this particular area in Ontario.
But would a train not have like a large light on the front of it as well? Like could a train passing by have a light that could possibly light up this lake? It looks like a train, sounds like a train. Might be a train.
It could be. It depends on how high this object was in the sky. 15 degrees is actually not that high, I suppose, but it said it headed off and one was 135 degrees, which is towards the east. Mm-hmm. So, depending on the orientation, maybe it was towards the tracks, maybe it wasn't.
Yeah, I guess a lot of it goes over my head because when you get into like so many degrees this direction, so many degrees in that direction, it's just like, okay, get to the good part.
Math is hard.
It is hard. Let's go to our final sighting that we're going to be talking about during Canada's Summer of UFOs. This is going to be early August 75, Manitoba Island in Ontario. This involves 4 witnesses. Bill Fielder, Bill Dant, Dick Pinkloam, and Gladys Ahmet, who were all at the same location, witnessed an oval craft about the size of 2 cars. It flashed red, orange, and yellow lights. They believed it landed on the bay, hovered, and then moved away in the early morning hours. And then this also has a handwritten note at the bottom saying, likely Jupiter. Could that just be because, actually, I should have set this up better. It was referred to as happening in early August. The reason they summarize it as early August is because they reported seeing the same thing at the same time, like 2200 hours, on August 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. So that would make sense to me that it could possibly be a planet or some kind of object that's going to be passing by at the same time every day.
Sure. And they're on Manitoba Island and, looking across the lake. And, maybe, this was lower to on the horizon, and that's why it seemed to be, in the sky and then dipping down, and the fact that it landed, could just have been the planet just going down, depending on the direction it was going. If it was in the west, that's what it would do. It would be setting. We'd like to have more information on this. But, it was enough that it caused all these people to make the report, and we're not afraid of coming forward and telling people about it. Again, because it seemed to be so many people, and this was in the news throughout Canada that year, that during that summer, people were really interested in the subject of UFOs.
Yeah, so I wasn't able to find any kind of news coverage going back that far, but would this have been a big topic in the news? Like, would people across Canada know during the summer of 75 that all of these reports were coming in?
Well, sure. In fact, even Charlie Red Star, the Carmen UFO reports, made the news nationally. One of the things that I did during that time, I collected news clippings, and I had a huge binder full of news clippings right across Canada. The Borda, Joe Borda's UFO that landed on the tobacco
farmer,
crop, that made the news in Ontario. Certainly the one in PEI would have made the news locally there, and all the other ones had some news coverage. So taken together, the summer of 75 had a lot of UFO reports. In fact, I just go looking at the National Research Council reports alone, there are about 2,000 separate pages of documents.
You mentioned that 75 was a unique time in terms of geopolitics, this idea that like the Russians were coming. Do you think that plays into the interest in UFOs in this era? Like, I just think, if today in 2025, we have, Unsolved Mysteries and the X-Files, all these movies, the American government has their gunships filming UFOs. So there's a lot going on that may lead to that may lead people to report UFOs and be open to the idea of doing so. What in 75 was it that made people so interested in the skies? I guess they had Star Wars.
Well, yeah, no, Star Wars was 77.
Yes, right.
And so this is before we really got into science fiction TV. Before Star Wars, science fiction on TV was pretty minimal. Star Trek, of course, was 72. Even the Falcon Lake case, which we've talked about on your show a couple of times, was 67. That's just 7 years earlier. Mm-hmm. And that was attributed in many ways to a Cold War sort of scenario. People worried about the Russians and that type of thing. So early 70s, there wasn't a lot of information going on. So magazines, this was the era of glossy UFO magazines, Official UFO, True UFO Quarterly, and all this sort of thing. There seemed to have been this desire for information. The fact that in the mid 70s, people were reporting things. That's when I started investigating UFOs, and the reason I got so enthralled in 1975 was because there were so many reports, and that in turn led me to investigate and talk to more and more people.
I know we covered a lot of different UFO sightings from the summer of 75, but do you know of any of these actually being solved or an explanation, or do we just simply have the actual report?
Well, some were investigated in great detail, of course. What I did for my piece on Substack, for example, I just pulled out some of the more interesting ones that were easily accessible. But, as I mentioned, 2,000 pages of the NRC. I had 150 cases myself just in Manitoba. And, the Carmen UFO cases were investigated to a great degree by police, local police and RCMP. We have a lot of that documentation. Some have explanations. There's a classic case from Carmen where a woman had taken a number of photos, and the photos made some of the wire services. Those particular photos turned out to have been Venus. But other cases did not turn out to have explanations. So, there were some cases that were puzzling and some that just didn't lend themselves otherwise.
Whatever happened that summer, it seems like it may have inspired you to write a song, because one of the things you'd managed to dig up and pulling all of this together is a Chris Rutkowski penned kind of folk song about UFOs. Was that actually written and recorded in 75?
It was written in 75, but recorded later. Back in another lifetime, I played coffee houses and stuff like that. I had a little bit of a musical bent. It's not actually the only song written about Charlie Resdar. There had been a few others that people had penned because it was actually a circus atmosphere. In fact, there were so many people traveling from Winnipeg out to the rural areas around Carmen to try and catch a glimpse of Charlie Resdar. There were actually traffic jams in the farm roads, and people trying to chase Charlie across the fields to try and catch a glimpse of him and all this sort of stuff. And people would camp out, and it was really quite remarkable. Another thing that occurred in 1975 was the first Winnipeg Folk Festival, which some people who are into folk music will know. It's the 50th anniversary of the Folk Festival this year, and there's a big celebration there too. So at the time, I thought, well, I'll make a little song about Charlie because people were talking about it so much, and that was the result.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to end the episode and give people a chance to hear Chris Rutkowski sing. I've never met that part of you, so I'm excited to. You're such an interesting fella. I didn't know you wrote UFO songs, specifically UFOs in Manitoba songs.
Right.
That's a niche that I don't think any other folk performer has filled.
That's true.
Well, this has been fantastic, Chris. For anyone out there interested in learning more about UFOs, specifically in Canada, find Chris Rutkowski online. I'll link his Substack article on this topic in the episode description, so you can read through it and see the actual scans of these reports that we're reading from. It's fantastic to go back and revisit stories like this. And the time capsule that you get in the form of these RCMP teledexis or whatever the heck they are. Very cool. Well, it was a better time, I'm sure of it. Technology ruined all this stuff.
Half a century ago, just imagine, and we're talking about that now, and we have the documentation from that.
Yeah, now it's just be all AI garbage, like this sort of stuff. This
Yeah, that's right. This is long before AI.
Yeah, there certainly wasn't AI. Well, this has been awesome, Chris. I appreciate you giving me the time and sharing your expertise with the listeners of this show. We always enjoy having you, and let's do it again soon.
Will do.
I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of Nighttime. I've added a link to Chris's Substack article that covers the 1975 UFO wave in this episode's description. Seeing the contemporary reports really shows how much things have changed over the last 50 years. If you enjoyed this talk, I'd go check it out. Now I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part, I'm going to give out some thanks. First, a big thanks to Chris Rutkowski for sharing an evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. A big thanks to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this episode, and a shout out to Linz from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides my intro and outro voiceovers. But then lastly, and most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Jory, Barb, and Brianna, we appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can help us out here in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple bucks a month, and that money funds the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, get them to you ad-free, and give you access to a back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still support the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know why they should listen. Your support is very much appreciated. And until next time, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.
Well, it's flying saucer time in Manitoba. Those glowing balls of light are in the skies. Well, they're flying to and fro, see their population grow. You don't need no telescope, just use your eyes. Well, the orange kind is pleased to sit on highways, and the red ones hang around the TV towers. And some even turn to green, the brightest that you've seen. You can stay out there and watch them all for hours. Well, just sit out in a field some night near Carmen. Before you know, you'll see 'em in the air. Charlie Red Star is his name. He don't seem to have no aim. He just flies around and knows you're sitting there. Oh, it's flying saucer time in Manitoba. Those glowing balls of light are in the skies. They're flying to and fro, see their population grow. You don't need no telescope, just use your eyes. Well, you can try to sneak up close to them by walking, or chase them up to 90 in your car. But it won't do you no good. They tell you if they could, they don't want to say hello so far. Well, some folks will tell you that they think you're crazy, and some will say, go out and check your eyes. But no matter what they say, until you're old and gray, you'll remember when those saucers filled the skies. Yes, it's flying saucer time in Manitoba. Those glowing balls of light are in the skies. Yes, they're flying to and fro, see their population grow. You don't need no telescope, just use your eyes. Well, they ain't no satellites or heliocopters, and they ain't no aeroplanes, so don't tell me. And if they're from outer space, they've sure come to the right place. Manitoba sure has some nice scenery. Yes, it's flying saucer time in Manitoba. Those glowing balls of light are in the skies.
They're flying to and fro, see their population grow. You don't need no telescope, just use your eyes.